Welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're jumping right into this totally fascinating breakdown of Dr. Robert A. Peterson's lecture on the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, specifically chapters 1 through 3. Now, if you've ever felt like these early chapters are just, incredibly dense or overwhelmingly heavy, you are definitely not alone. Dr. Peterson actually frames this whole section as this brilliant, systematic legal proceeding. It's like a cosmic courtroom drama, and we're going to unpack exactly how Paul builds this airtight case. And honestly, this quote right here, it perfectly captures the struggle of the famous church reformer Martin Luther. I mean, before he really grasped the full context of Paul's writings, Luther notoriously hated the idea of what he called God's damning righteousness. When he read that the gospel revealed God's righteousness, his immediate reaction was just anger. He actually felt like God was mocking humanity by calling condemnation good news. But as we'll see in just a minute, Luther was kind of missing the broader backdrop that Paul was painting. Okay, so here's our roadmap. To understand how Paul ultimately solves Luther's problem, we're going to treat these chapters like a courtroom docket. We'll look at the context, the pivot to wrath, 3 specific indictments against those denying creation, the hypocritical moralist, and the lawbreakers, and then, finally, the universal verdict. All right, Section 1, Context, the jeweler's cloth. Let's look at a brilliant visual metaphor Dr. Peterson uses to explain why Paul focuses on such heavy, dark material right out of the gate. Think about walking into a really high-end jewelry store, right? They don't just toss their diamonds onto a bright white table. No way. They place them on deep, black velvet. Why? Because that dark background makes the gems shine with just incredible brilliance. And the crucial point here is that Paul is doing the exact same thing theologically. You literally cannot fully appreciate the beautiful diamond of God's grace and justification without first placing it against the really dark backdrop of human sin and divine wrath. Romans 1:18 through 3:20 is that black velvet cloth. Moving on to Section 2, the pivot, righteousness to wrath. Let's see exactly how Paul constructs this dark backdrop in the text itself. So in Romans 1:16, Paul proudly sets up his theme of the Evangelion, the good news of salvation and God's saving righteousness. But then, almost immediately in verse 18, he pulls a massive pivot. He shifts right to what Luther called the Kakangelion, the bad news. Paul deliberately takes the word righteousness from his thesis and replaces it with wrath. Now, Dr. Peterson points out that Paul is using this linguistic device super intentionally. Through the lens of lexical semantics, words like righteousness and wrath here have a paradigmatic relation. Basically, that just means they antagonize and define each other. Paul is arguing that God himself must deal with his holy hatred against sin before his saving righteousness can actually be known and applied. Long story short, you have to understand the wrath to really grasp the rescue. All right, Section 3, Indictment 1, Denying Creation. With the backdrop set, the trial officially begins. Let's dive into the first piece of evidence in Paul's courtroom drama, focusing on the first group, the pagans, or humanity as a whole outside of special revelation. Paul argues that God's eternal power and divine nature are clearly perceived through the things that have been made. Dr. Peterson references John Calvin's term here, sensus divinitatis. It's essentially this intrinsic, built-in awareness of a creator. The prosecution's argument is that humanity is left entirely without excuse because they possess this internal awareness, yet they actively suppress the truth anyway. And that suppression leads to what theologians call the noetic effects of sin. Derived from the Greek word nous, which means mind or intellect, this describes how sin actually damages human reasoning. Rather than honoring the creator they intuitively know exists, Paul says humanity became completely futile in their reasoning. They traded the glory of God for idols, exchanging the truth for a lie. Just to objectively break down Paul's specific theological argument here, Dr. Peterson notes that because humanity pushed away the natural revelation of creation, God essentially gave them over to their desires. And according to the text, this handing over resulted in deep idolatry, various sexual sins, which Dr. Peterson notes includes homosexual behavior, as explicitly condemned within this specific biblical framework, and a severely debased mind. This debased mind bred a whole host of destructive behaviors, things like malice, envy, and strife, ultimately ending with a society that not only practices evil, but actively cheers on others who do the same. Okay, Section 4, Indictment 2, the hypocritical moralist. Let's see how Paul builds the case against the second group on trial. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't do those terrible things. And honestly, Paul totally anticipates that exact defense. In Chapter 2, he shifts his focus directly to the moralist. Paul argues that even Gentiles, meaning those who didn't have the written 10 Commandments, are still a law to themselves. They have this internal moral barometer, a conscience, that is constantly accusing or excusing their behavior. It's basically bearing witness against them. And this brilliantly illustrates Dr. Peterson's point, borrowing a concept from C.S. Lewis. Think about it like this. If you claim there's no absolute right and wrong, let someone punch you in the nose or step on your toe. Your immediate reaction is going to be, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't do that to me. When wrong is done to you, you suddenly become a very quick expert in discerning right and wrong, right? This proves that this law of the heart is just an inescapable, hardwired part of human nature. And because the moralist judges others for things they secretly do themselves, well, they end up condemned by their own internal standard. So, moving to Section 5, Indictment 3, the Lawbreakers. This brings us to our third and final group in the indictment, which is actually Paul's primary target and main focus, the Jews. Israel stands uniquely condemned in this courtroom. And why is that? Well, because they possess the ultimate advantage, the written word of God. Dr. Peterson outlines that this means they are systematically thrice condemned. They are condemned by the natural law of creation, they are condemned by the internal law of conscience, and they are condemned by the very written law of Moses that they literally hold in their hands and boast about. The prosecution rests its case against this third group by revealing a pretty tragic irony. Paul points out that Israel substituted outward religious conformity, things like circumcision, for true inward spiritual obedience. They prided themselves as guides to the blind, yet they broke the very laws they were preaching, which makes them, in Paul's rigorous argument, the worst hypocrites of all. Actually, to the point that God's name was being blasphemed by outsiders specifically because of their behavior. Finally, Section 6, the Universal Verdict. With all three distinct groups indicted, the pagans, the moralists, and the religious insiders, we are now fully ready to hear the final universal verdict. What we're looking at here perfectly summarizes Dr. Peterson's breakdown of how Paul has systematically stripped away every possible defense mechanism from every single type of human being on Earth. Whether your revelation came from looking at the stars, listening to your conscience, or reading ancient scrolls, you've failed the standard. Literally no one escapes the courtroom. And to deliver the final hammer blow, Paul strings together a whole collection of Old Testament texts in Romans 3 to prove that the law was never actually meant to justify anyone. The law functions much more like a mirror. It only brings the devastating, undeniable knowledge of universal sin. Every mouth is stopped. The whole world is held accountable. Which leaves us just staring at the black velvet cloth, facing this incredibly critical, provocative question: if no human being, regardless of their background or morality, can be justified by the law, how then can anyone possibly be saved? I know, it's a super heavy thought, but it perfectly sets the stage for the brilliant diamond of God's saving grace to finally shine. We'll explore exactly how Paul answers that question in our next explainer. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you next time.